Oh, hi there. Chandra Easton here from starastrologyhealing.com, esoteric astrologer, and I'm just going to have a bit of a chat about some of the planetary patterns and events that I can see that are occurring in the middle of July in 2025. I'm looking at sort of mundane astrology and esoteric astrology and the political situation on the planet. So I'm just going to, and as I said, I'm talking about world events, some of the planetary patterns. I'll be looking at the planetary natal chart for Francesca Albanese and discussing some of the things that she speaks about, namely the economy of genocide and what's going on in Palestine. Okay, so we're now, here's the chart for the 17th of July, and I've just cast it for London. I don't quite know why I cast it for London. I suppose I could have cast it for anywhere, but there's a few things. I'll just get my little pointer so you can see what I'm talking about. All right, so on Thursday, the 17th of July, the sun is sitting there in the 25th degree of Cancer. Now, the 25th degree of Cancer is a place where there's a fixed star called Procyon, and Procyon is associated with ancient wisdom and drawing upon wisdom. And I suppose all of us have an opportunity, really, to learn from the past, to draw upon the wisdom of history. And I suppose if we don't learn from history, then we're bound to repeat it. But that's for all of us individually, collectively, nationally. This 17th of July, this sort of the middle of July, we have to really delve deep and ask ourselves, what's the collective wisdom? What is it humanity's trying to learn? Okay, other things that I notice is that the Earth is approaching Pluto, and it will be there in a week's time. It takes 7 days for the Earth to be exactly on top of Pluto when the sun gets to 2.5 degrees Leo. And, you know, the Earth's associated with our Dharma and the way we demonstrate that we've learned something about our worldly life and our spiritual life. And so when the Earth and Pluto go together, it asks us to let go of what we've outgrown. Could be belief systems, could be it could be some rational thoughts that we have that don't fit in the world. This is for everybody, you know. So use this coming week, the next week, to say, well, what are the attitudes or the belief systems or the rigidity? And it's got Pluto in Aquarius has a great deal to do with rigidity of mind and being stuck in the old paradigm. And so ask yourself, how and in what way can I let go of that so that I can open up to the wisdom of what it is that life's teaching me. Okay, what else can I see there? Here this week, Mars is approaching and very close to the South Node. Now think about the South Node. It holds many of our gifts and our talents from past incarnations, as well as our soul's history. So it can be the best and the worst of who we are. So when we work well with the South Node, we sort of dig into our past and we learn from it and we bring forward the learning. But if we're not careful, then the South Node can act a bit like a quagmire, and we can sink into it and fall into it and disappear. And so we have the planet Mars, one of the non-sacred planets in our solar system, in Virgo, sitting right on top of the South Node. So it may be that, you know, when Mars is in Virgo, it's got a great deal to do with ordinary living and the common people and the health and the well-being of society. And really you could say that society and the health and well-being of society on so many levels is falling apart at the seams, either because of the haves and the have-nots, or because some individuals or nations or governments want to look away and don't want to look at the fact that I'm all right and I've got my health and my well-being, but that nation or that group of people or that family from the family of humanity doesn't have the basics for life and livelihood. Yes, we have to be extremely careful that we don't sink into a quagmire of self-sufficiency and forget about the capacity for others to live easily and well. And of course, Mars is a planet that's associated with war on some levels. And we have war, you know, in the Middle East being perpetuated against the ordinary people. You know, these are not the people who are losing their lives every day as they're trying to get food and water in Palestine. They're not in the military. They're not in the army. They're not terrorists. They're not. They're just trying to live an ordinary life. So the war has degenerated to the massacre of the ordinary people trying to go about their ordinary lives. And we're coming up to not quite 2 years, but we're getting closer to the 2 years since this war started in October, 7th of October 2023. And some might say that it's been going for decades, really. Okay, now Mars gets exactly conjunct the South Node on the 20th of July. So is that the rock bottom that humanity's hitting? Let's pray and hope that after the 20th of July, we start to surface and bring forward some of the lessons and some of the humanity and some of the compassion and some of the ability to be there for brothers and sisters. Some of this wisdom that Procyon's inviting us to access. And let's hope that we'll leave behind the rhetoric or the justification or the, Pluto in Aquarius in its worst vibration becomes extremely mental. And when any of us are extremely mental, we shut down the heart. Yeah? So the opportunity for all of us is to let go of very rigid belief systems, to open the heart of compassion, to look and see how and in what way we can undo suffering and share so that others can simply live. One of the other things that I noticed on the 17th of July was planetoid Chiron sitting there in the 27th degree of Aries with this exact square. See the red lines there? That's the exact square to the Sun to Chiron. And probably within 12 hours or so, the Sun will be exactly square the Moon. And, when the Sun's in Cancer, one of the dangers of the Sun in Cancer is that we revert into a very nationalistic fetal position. The crab that hides in its shell and covers the eyes and the ears and doesn't want to see. It's emblematic of the very low vibration energy of Cancer. And the Sun Chiron square may well be that it takes a lot to dislodge us out of our nationalistic tendencies, our blind, rigid following of old paths, or our selfishness. I'd love to help so-and-so, but I'm too busy because my life is more important or my family is more important. But we are being called upon to stretch our capacity for generosity. The highest vibration of the Sun in Cancer is that we recognise that we are a family of humanity beyond colour and creed and nationality, and that we extend beyond selfishness. And notice that the Sabian symbol for the degree of Chiron, which is just into the 28th degree of Aries, is a large, disappointed audience. And, I think about that and I think, well, are we disappointed in ourselves for our lack of humanity? I've heard a number of speakers talking about the world situation saying that they're ashamed to be American, or they're ashamed, lesser people, but some saying they're ashamed to be an individual of a member that claims to be democratic and yet looks the other way while genocide occurs. Could also be that the Holy Ones, the spiritual hierarchy of Earth, wonder what on earth humanity are doing, and that we have disappointed, we have let ourselves down. Certainly, Chiron's to do with healing and integration of body, mind and spirit, and there's a great disappointment occurring around this. Okay, let me continue. Other things to look at in this chart is the planet Uranus. There's Uranus there, 0 degrees of Gemini. It's been into Gemini, was it a week or two, I think? Yeah. And Uranus in Gemini, as I talked a little bit about this a couple of weeks ago, is asking us to bridge, find the pathway and bridge from the rational mind through the heart of compassion to the higher mind, to the intuitive mind. And it's also offering us opportunities to network and to extend and to reach out. And that's the same kind of a theme that happens when Uranus is sextile. So you see this green line here, that's Uranus sextile Saturn. So this is extremely hopeful that there will be some individuals, some nations. I mean, I know the Spanish prime ministers stood up in the public forum and called out the genocide of the Israelis. The French prime minister has done that. You know, there are people and nations standing up and calling out enough, enough to the harm, enough to the selfishness, enough to the looking in the other direction. And this sextile between Saturn and Uranus, because this is an outer planet sextiling an outer planet, so it's opportunities en masse for some aspects of humanity to grow and expand and share with others who need our help. There are so many people, you know, who are looking to lend a hand, whether it's politically, whether it's socially, whether it's economically, whatever way. Now, there is also a sextile from Pluto down to Saturn. And so this is the recycling of the old. And of course, the best, when you have a pattern like that, you see the blue line, this is a mini grand sextile. There's a trine between Uranus and Pluto, extremely transformational, very, very hopeful that certain people are realising, actually, aren't we better than this? Can't we? I thought we'd learnt after the 20th century that we never ever would have another war and have such genocide, and we have to network and find ways of liberation to move beyond those 20th century patterns. That's the best use of the mini grand sextile. Yes, and of course, not only is Uranus trining Pluto, but over the next week it's also trining the Earth, and it will also form a sextile to the Sun when the Sun moves into Leo. So what we have set up there, it will go from a mini grand sextile to a cradle, a fiery cradle, which is dynamic and creative and courageous for spiritual growth and for evolution and for moving beyond old patterns. And so every single person who's interested in personal and spiritual and collective growth can use this pattern, this mini grand sextile and then the cradle over the next week to reach out, to link arms. And of course, all of us have access through the internet. We can reach out and we can link arms with people in you know, different continents, different races, people we would never normally have spoken to, and find ways we can inspire them or they can inspire us. And so we have to reach across the divide. Okay, I shall leave that, and I'll talk to you now about the fact that Mercury is going retrograde. Okay, so I've got this chart, same chart, 17th of July, that's this Thursday. And you'll notice when you look at the Mercury, there it is in the middle degrees, the cross quarters of Leo. It's sort of, you know, the cross quarters are very important whenever they fall in the middle of the fixed, the cardinal, or the mutable signs, because we have a capacity for breakthrough. It's a bit like, well, I'm from Queensland, you know, and if you try and use a hammer to break a macadamia nut, Queensland nut, you've got to hit it with just the right force, just the right place, and it will break evenly with no damage to the succulent macadamia inside it. So there's something about this mid degrees of Leo in the cross quarters that says, okay, can we send the energy of justice and liberty and love and compassion out to break the deadlock that's been occurring? Now, You see the letter S there? That tells us that Mercury is going stationary, which simply means that from the Earth's perspective, it appears as if Mercury, the planet Mercury, is moving backwards. It's not really, it's an optical illusion. But esoterically, it tells us that for the next 3 weeks, and it's stationary on the 17th and the 18th of July, and then up until the 11th of August, it's moving in this apparent backwards motion. And so that gives us 3 weeks, roughly, 3 weeks and a little bit, to reflect. When Mercury's retrograde, we're meant to reflect. We're meant to ponder and contemplate and learn from matters of the past, but not act in the world, but rather to draw to us wisdom. So it's a very fortuitous time for spiritual reflection around personal matters. It could be in your personal life, could be to do with love, could be to do with finances, could be to do with vocation. Depends where it falls in your chart. But in the worldly arena, it's telling us to think before we act, so that we can, you know, as I was using an analogy before of trying to break a macadamia with a hammer. If you don't hit the macadamia nut in the right position, you end up destroying the succulent macadamia inside the hard shell of the nut, and it's inedible. So we don't want a world situation that's inedible. What we want is a world situation when we break deadlocks. Okay, so we've got until the 11th of August, and then what happens is Mercury goes stationary again, and then moves forward, what we call the direct motion, on the 12th of August. And by the time we get to the 12th of August, Mercury will be in the 5th degree of Leo. Now, the Sabian symbol for the 5th degree of Leo is rock formations at the edge of a precipice. So you might like to contemplate that, but I look at it and I think, okay, well, we're right on the edge of a precipice. You know, what harm have we done to each other, humanity, to the earth, to the planet? And are we going to, excuse me, are we going to continue to do harm? Or will we break free from these patterns of harm? Move away from the edge of the precipice. Excuse my coughing fit. Okay, other things that are happening this week is that Mercury's sextile Venus. So see the green line there? Yep. So Venus is sextile the moon on Thursday. And Venus is sextile Mercury. So this is great for opening pathways to dialogue. If we continue to consider other people as our enemy, then we don't talk to them, we don't trust them, there's no dialogue. So it says use the pathways of dialogue. And okay. All right, so let's continue on. And I wanted to talk to you about the chart of Francesca Albanese. She's an Italian lawyer, human rights lawyer. And I would say that she's, on a soul level, holding the energy of the Shambhala energy, meaning warrior energy. And the reason I think that is, as I'll explain it as I look at her chart. So she's an international human rights lawyer and an academic. And since 2022, that's 3 years, she's been the UN Special Rapporteur. I don't quite know what the rapporteurs are. Maybe they're advisors. I know that when I heard her speaking, and she said that it's an unpaid position. So but she's got a great deal of compassion and action focused upon the crisis in the Middle East. Anyway, sometime in June, she published a list of more than 100 companies that have been supporting the genocidal war in Palestine. And as a result of this, she's since been embargoed. They're refusing to release the document that lists all the companies. And there's been a call, and she's been calling for the end of the apartheid system in Israel and calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. She's been calling for Netanyahu and some of his cronies that they be forced to appear before the International Criminal Court. She's been calling upon these businesses, these 100+ companies, and other businesses to just boycott the Israeli war and stop doing business with the Israeli war machine. She's been calling upon the citizens to boycott all the businesses that are supporting genocide. This is extremely courageous because people have been assassinated and murdered for less in the modern world. Anyway, on the 20th of June, 20th of June was when she, that's the date, I think it was a week or so before then that she published this list of 100 companies. And it was on the 20th of June that Trump's American government called upon the United Nations to remove her from her role as an advisor, special rapporteur to the UN. And they've sanctioned her, which means basically that they're freezing all of her assets, stopping her from proceeding and travelling in and out of America. And they say that she's supporting terrorism and anti-Semitism. So I find this really, really shocking. And I've listened to several videos of her talking, and it's just extremely inspiring. Extremely inspiring. So I looked up to see if I could find her chart, and I discovered she was born on the 30th of March, 1977. I don't know what time she's born, which means that the moon sitting there at 9 degrees Leo could be earlier Leo, could be late Leo. We don't know what the ascendant is or the midheaven. But we do know that she has 4 planets in Aries: Vulcan, the Sun, Venus and Mercury, and the South Node. And Aries on a higher turn of the spiral has a very, very strong connection to the warrior energy, the spiritual dynamic actions towards justice and liberty, the Shambhala energy. It's a very, very strong warrior energy in the Aries, and she has Mercury and Venus together. And, you know, when people have Mercury and Venus together, there's a harmony and a great capacity to download from the higher self to the personal self without any interference. Yes, so this tells me that she's got very fine equipment, you might say, on the higher mental level, and that her Mercury and Venus are not far from her South Node. Yeah, so she has old history, old incarnations of being involved in inspirational fights for justice. That's the way I'd look at it. Yeah. She has Saturn in Leo, which is associated with the heart and compassion. And I think she probably has a Moon-Saturn conjunction. We don't know exactly what degree the Moon would be in, which gives a sense of responsibility and maturity and leadership to do with compassion. And many people with Saturn and Leo have a great deal of their life works involved in nurturing or healing or being there for children. And her work really is for the emancipation and the freedom of individuals to live an ordinary life. It's a fantastic trine. She's got the Sun and Vulcan together, which means that she has this capacity for clear insight and download of the warrior energy, the spiritual warrior energy. And I think she will have not only the Sun trine Saturn, which indicates a maturity, and I would say a disciple, yeah. And I'm inclined to say a higher disciple because of the fact that she's working on the world stage, and she's working not on an individual level, not on a national level, but on an international level, and she's taking enormous risks in the name of love. So I think this is a higher disciple working with the energy of compassion and love. Whether or not she has Leo rising, I don't know. She has Mars in Pisces. People with Mars in Pisces have often suffered greatly, and they recognise suffering when they see it. And sometimes they are martyred, and she is currently basically being persecuted because of her courage and her conviction of standing up for the Palestinians. And if you listen to Francesca, you'll hear her talking about standing up for anyone that's oppressed, from any individuals, any community, any group of people that have been buried under oppression. Her Mars has a yod, there's an inconjunct from Mars to Saturn, which I think is very good for the capacity to navigate and negotiate to move forward. And the outlet for the yod is over here in Virgo, which of course is where Mars is at the moment. Yeah, so she's got Mars in conjunct Pluto, which gives a capacity to, it reminds me of a snow plough, you know, that you can just move forward because of the energy of compassion. And no doubt she has been martyred in past lives, and it's clearly what they're attempting to do to her is that they want a sacrificial lamb, want someone to pin up and say she's the problem. So the projection of Zionism and the projection of the terrorism is going out towards her. Anyone with a lot of Aries who's a higher disciple must immediately look at the Uranus, because Uranus has a very strong connection to Aries on the higher turn of the wheel. And I noticed that Uranus sits in the 11th degree of Scorpio. Now, normally the 10th, 11th, and the 12th degrees of Scorpio indicate that people can be frozen by fear. Yeah, so it's the degree of fear. And yet we see what I think was clearly a very strong planet in her chart, if not her sole ruler, the planet Uranus, barreling through the degree of fear. And so it appears to me that she's facing enormous tests, and she's quite young. She's only in her late 40s. She might have turned 48, is that right? 48 this year. And this is a test of a higher disciple to proceed in the face of enormous fear. And when people have asked her, are you afraid? She says, it's not about me. It's about the people who are dying every day. Sometimes 100, sometimes 50, 200 people while they're trying to get water and food. Yeah. You look at her Uranus, and she has this fantastic trine from Mars to Uranus. Yeah, so she's had more than one incarnation where she's worked fearlessly as a warrior, maybe not as a lawyer, but in other capacities. And her Uranus squares the moon. So she clearly has a lot to lose herself. And yet I don't think that they're going to terrify her or stop her. And that's been I found enormously encouraging to listen to. Somebody asked her the other day, do you think that the United Nations will support you? And her answer was that she's getting enormous support from human rights lawyers all around the planet who are speaking up and standing up and talking. So she's not getting support from the United Nations, but support is coming. Fantastic chart. Yeah. The Sabian symbol for Uranus and Scorpio is a drowning man rescued. And I suppose, that's what people who have the courage of their convictions do, is they galvanise the rest of us to look at who's drowning and who needs rescuing. Yeah. Okay. I've taken Francesca's chart here, and her chart, well, as I said, I don't know what time, but I'm assuming that she's got an early Leo rising. Of course, I've only guessed that. I have really no idea. I haven't rectified it, but I wondered. And around the outside of the chart, I've put the planetary patterns for the day she was sanctioned, the 9th of July. So let's have a look and see what's happening for her. So there's the planetoid Chiron making its way through these sort of last degrees of Aries, the 27th degree of Aries. Yes, and she has, what's the midpoint? So if you look at the midpoint between her Venus, her Mercury, her South Node and her Chiron, it would be 25 degrees Aries, which is where Chiron is. And you see, interestingly enough, she has Chiron in Taurus, and she's fighting on behalf of a whole group of people for the basic rights of land, food and shelter. Very Taurian. Yes, so I think that the Chiron, which is hitting very close to the midpoint this configuration of Venus, Mercury, the South Node, and Chiron. Um, you know, she's shining a light, because Chiron is meant. Chiron is about healing the disparate parts of ourselves, the personal self and the spiritual self. You know, the selfishness with the unselfishness, and so she appears to be demonstrating this light of healing by standing up with conviction. Okay, other things that are happening. Pluto is in the 3rd degree of Leo. Pluto has a great deal to do with, excuse me, any attempt to be silenced or suppressed, or in her case, sanctioned or locked up or whatever. So I had a feeling that Pluto was probably impacting her chart quite strongly. And you can see that it's not long past the square to Chiron. She's been up to her eyeballs in this fight for the last couple of years. But I wondered whether Pluto is actually on her descendant opposite her ascendant, if she might be born at 12:38 in the morning and having a Leo rising. I don't know. But in any event, she's certainly had a very strong Pluto square to Chiron for the last few months. Other things to notice. If that time was right, the planet Saturn would be going through her 9th house of international affairs and matters to do with international justice. We don't know if that's where it is or not. Transiting Uranus is, where is it, Chandra? There it is, right on top of her Jupiter. Okay, now Jupiter, if I just digress a little moment, when Jupiter's in Taurus, what happens is that Jupiter doesn't function very well in Taurus, because there's a tendency for acquisition of money or land or power. Yeah, and this is exactly what the Israeli government are doing. Is they've grabbed, with the support of the United Nations, the support of America, the support of Europe, most European nations. It's like, yes, you can have the Middle East, you can have that land. You know, they've tried to take more land recently in Iran. They've made encroachments, you know, all around the Middle East, you know, over the last several decades, into Syria, into Lebanon, Egypt some decades ago. So I don't know, but I wonder whether Francesca has some old karma with inappropriate acquisition of land or money or power, and that karmically she has, what would you say, you know, she's invested in the liberation and the sharing of the fruits of the earth. That's a speculation on my part, but I wonder whether there's something karmic there for her. Impossible to say, but what we can say is that Uranus on top of Jupiter, it's like a sunburst. You know, if you go to watch the fireworks on New Year's Eve, and they go up, and then there's this spectacular, and everything colour and light and beauty floods the heavens. Uranus and Jupiter can do that. She's brought the issue of the Palestinian people up and up and out. Everyone can see it. Yeah. So she's shaming the governments who are supporting it. I heard her say that someone asked her whether or not the Italian government was supporting her, and she said, no, actually they're supporting Israel. Yeah. So she's looking for allies wherever she can find them, and she did list a whole list of countries, and you could say basically it's the global south rather than Europe and America and Australia. They're all sort of supporting Israel, whereas the global south, by and large, are supporting the Palestinian cause, not necessarily even their Arab brothers and sisters, because money is at the root of all evil. Okay, what else can we see? The planet Mercury, which is to do with this capacity and this conviction to speak from the heart. You know, Mercury in Leo, people are often very good orators. Yeah, that's where Mercury is by transit at the moment. And it's not not far off of her Saturn. So I think when Mercury's crossed her moon and Saturn, just literally in the last week or so, she's published, she's been sanctioned, they're attempting to crucify her. Yeah. Okay, and there's the transiting Mars, not far off of her natal Mars. Okay, a very inspiring woman. Let me continue. Francesca speaks about the economy of genocide. And as I said, she named more than 100 companies, multinational companies that are profiteering from the war. And she talks about it in terms of two phases. Is it two or three phases? And one phase was the displacement of the Palestinians, yeah, which has been happening basically ever since the end of the Second World War. The displacement of Palestinians. In the second phase, I think there was a third one, the second phase is the building, once the Palestinians are out of the way, then a building of a new society. And she names and shames the companies. And of course, she talks about the people that we know about, big tech, Palantir, the arms dealers, Microsoft, IBM. We've talked about that in previous discussions, all of those that are running war through algorithms and AI, Amazon, Hewlett Packard. She talks about big energy companies, primarily BP and Chevron. And as I said, because the report that she was writing has been buried and they're trying to bury it completely, it's impossible to get a copy of it because the document itself has been sanctioned as she was trying to publish it. Yeah, banks and finances, BlackRock and Vanguard and other ones that I'd not heard of, Barclays and BNP Paribas, these are just the ones that are making the most money. And she talks about the supply chain, all of those companies, multinational companies that are up to their eyeballs in the profiteering. And we saw all of this after the Second World War. And all those companies, or indeed nations, that were profiting from the Nazi regime were later held to account, and it took decades sometimes. But here she is uncovering, and one of them was Maersk. That's the big, I think it's the largest, the shipping, Danish shipping. And they've been shamed to such an extent over the last few months that they've backed away a little bit. And they've said, okay, all right, we won't support Israel on this level and that level, but they haven't backed away completely. They're still complicit in war crimes. And of course, all those that are making the weapons and making the machinery, and the largest companies from America, I think they are Lockheed Martin and Caterpillar and Hyundai and Volvo. Most of these names we know very well. There's some more I'd never heard of. Yes, there's a bit of a list of some of the logos of these companies that are supporting Israel. And that's a very small list because, as I said, there's more than 100. And then the long-term goal is, once you've got rid of the Palestinians, well, then we build up tourism and trade, and then we bring in the builders, and we extract what we need and we build something new. And so there are a whole lot of businesses and companies like Airbnb or Booking.com, or the insurance company Allianz, who are up to their eyeballs in this, let's take this land of Palestinians and make it into something for ourselves. And then there are what Francesca refers to as the network of enablers. That's the insurers, the universities, the charities, this joking, the one that's been killing the Palestinians when they come to try and get food and water and claiming they're a charity. Wealth funds and banks. It's so beyond disgusting. And of course, behind all of this is the military-industrial complex. And I heard someone say, well, war is business, business is booming. And even though we know this, and we have known that perpetual war is what the military-industrial complex want, they don't really care who wins the war. They don't really care which continent the war's on. They just want continual war because this brings in the profit. And the USA, America, is the global arms supplier, supplying more than 50% of the weaponry for the wars around the planet. And of course, the defence contractors are the American ones, because of course, as soon as there's a war, then someone has to go in and you know, build the bombs and build this and build the planes and build the other. And so all the money to perpetuate the war goes to the American armaments, the global defence industry. And this is Boeing and General Dynamics and other companies that I'd not heard of. And I was astounded to discover that part of what happens when nations are admitted into NATO is that they are forced to modernise their armies. And as a result of that, they're forced to purchase armaments, and then they go into debt. And who do they go into debt to? The military industrial complex, of which more than 50% are based in America. So you can see this sort of supply and demand of war and how disgusting it is. And the US supplies 2/3 of the NATO's contracts. So, you know, there's a great advantage for the USA to perpetuate war, because they make the money whenever someone goes into NATO. And then, of course, what happens is that they lend aid to countries like Ukraine or wherever it is, and the countries, or whatever countries have been brought into NATO, and then the countries are required to boost their military and spend money, and then they end up owing money. So it's this vicious cycle of war and manufacturing armaments and war for profit. And I think I heard somewhere that the US defence budget has gone into the trillions by 2025. And of course, there's a child in Gaza salvaging the wreckages of the bombs that have destroyed their homes. And since 1948, Israel's received $318 billion in aid from America. And the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange has risen 179% since October 2023. That's all you need to know, really, that war is business and business is booming. It's added 157.9 billion in market value. That's just in the last 2 years. So disgusting. So what we're talking about here is corporate war profiteering. And of course, all of this in the face of international law. Who's being prosecuted for the war crimes? Certainly not these companies that are supplying military tech. Who is it that's profiting from settlements? These companies. The average Israeli is fed propaganda. The average American is fed propaganda. They don't know these statistics. And if you don't know the statistics, it's easy to bury one's head in the sand and to not realise that the stock market's booming, that there's enormous gain. And what Francesca referred to as the economy of occupation, she said has now become the economy of genocide. It's not enough just to make money by occupying Palestine for the last 70 years, but now it's about the genocide. So what on earth can we do? Well, I wish I could have got a list of the more than 100 companies. We have to boycott them, or we have to pressure them. You can certainly write. I've been writing to the Australian government about their complicity, because the Australian government is up to its eyeballs in saying yes to America and going along with NATO. Francesca Albanese talks about the South African apartheid and how businesses faced consequences for enabling atrocities. So the enabling and the collaboration, this is what happened after the Second World War. Those collaborators of Second World War ended up being jailed. So the moment Benjamin Netanyahu is no longer the leader of Israel, then he will be jailed. Bit of a graph there. There's terrible statistics of the money that's being made through war. And so what can we do? Well, all we can do is call for justice and calls for liberty, and recognise that we need to speak out and we need to speak up and we need to support and pray for anyone like Francesca Albanese who is working on the world stage in the face of such injustice and such atrocity. We can sort of bring her into our prayers and continually invoke and work with the energy of justice and liberty for all. Okay, and here at the last one are a few links that I'd come across over the last week as I was looking at this matter.